Okay, so good morning again to all of you here and online, and apologies for the delays. We're switching to English. Most of the people present here, I've noticed, are Dutch speaking, apart from a couple. But in any case, we're also recording this session for later use. Firstly, thank you all for being present here, especially also to some of our speakers that came sometimes from a distance to make it. And I think we're still expecting some people to join, but we're not going to be a very tall crowd either. So I think we're going to be like 20, 25 during the course of the day, and then another 20, 25 something online. And good morning, welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, that's Luca. So make yourself comfortable wherever you feel easy to sit. Okay, so why are we here? Basically because we've invited you here, obviously. We, as in LSEC, and my name is Ulrich Salzstacks, I'm the Managing Director of LSEC, which is an association of IT security companies that has been around for 20 years, as you can see. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, and you're still welcome to join us in some of those festivities. But also together with some of our partners here present, Miriam is here from Flanders Make, one of the project partners, and then Dave from COSIC, KU Leuven. We will be talking about that a little bit later on. The reason why we're doing this is because we started an activity just over a year ago, but officially 1st of December 2021. That is, which was called IIoTSBOM, and that's still continuing. And the main focus of that activity is really to make sure that the concepts and the ideas and also the way to utilize software bill of materials is being recognized here in Belgium, in Flanders, actually also the rest of Europe. Because it's something that we feel from a security perspective is quite useful for both the developers of systems and devices, as well as the users and the consumers. So if you were wondering, we actually just started like 3 minutes ago. And so the whole reasoning behind this is multifold, and I'll walk you through a couple of these different things and steps. Luca, you can see online that everything's more or less okay. All right. So let's start with the bigger picture. The bigger picture basically means there's things happening in the world, and
Ulrich, sorry to interrupt you, because online they cannot see
this
slides.
Okay.
It's back on the first page.
Okay, resume share. Now you should be able to do that.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. Thank you for noticing. So my assistant, my lovely assistant today. Thank you, Luca. One of the basic concerns and reasons is that there's challenges happening in the industrial world as we see them, but not only industrial world, actually in the world to the larger extent. We're focusing a little bit more with IIoTSBOM on industrial environments, but it's also applicable, of course, for other types of environments which would be more into business related, as we will be talking about in a second. Manufacturing has been, however, last year and still this year, the #1 target, especially for cyber attacks, cyber incidents. I don't usually like the terminology of cyber attacks because it's not always that clear what that means. But in any case, according to many studies, industry was one of the main targets, both, if you like, for the normal business, as in organized cyber crimeware, I would like to call it, as the ones specifically coming out of Russia, North Korea, China, and others for that matter. We'll still have to see, of course, how that pans out during the rest of 2022, because as we've heard over the last couple of days, other incidents have happened also quite significantly. Data breach Australia overnight, clear that there have been significant eavesdropping attempts into mobile phones of many politicians. So not yet that clear what 2022 will be, but at least from our side and from our perspective, we do see that there's quite a lot of activity happening still in industry. Within that space, ransomwares were quite significantly reason for those attacks. And what I'll try to convey to you is that one of the good elements about developing SBOMs is that it's not going to give you, let's say, a remedy against ransomwares, but at least it's going to give either your customers or you as an implementer better facilities to manage and to cope with, let's say, preventing ransomware from happening. So that's one of the reasons of this this showcasing here. In that space of manufacturing, this is not, of course, the only thing that's happening. There's many different cybersecurity trends that we see which are happening around. I'm not going to dwell over them, but just to let you know that we're trying to cover those. We have some specific activities which you can also find online under the terminology of connected factories, where we're actually giving indications on what cybersecurity pathways for manufacturing would mean. And definitely one of those elements that we have identified are also security bill of materials, as we tend to call them. So the official name of an SBOM is software bill of materials, but we sort of transferred that a little bit because we think it's partially because of the fact that we are born and raised with security and cybersecurity in the first place. We think it's also much more persistent if we focus it slightly more towards security. So therefore, in our terminology, it's a security bill of materials. But during the day, we'll see that we can use them amongst each other and with different perspectives, because it has many advantages also on other domains. So why are we of course even concerned about cybersecurity, and how do we manage the cybersecurity? Well, we start usually with threat modeling concept. So how do you identify what the real threat is? And then basically from those, we can start identifying ways to protect. So it's really about a number of assets that we discover. It's about persons. It's about basically the goals and capabilities that, in this case, maybe an attacker has. And then is basically the question, okay, how can we compare the challenges of the cost of an attack versus the outlay of the benefits? So that's typically the balance that we take from threat modeling and risk perspective idea. And then we dive into what do we need to protect? Well, we try to protect, of course, devices, assets. We try to protect the systems overall, but also the output that they generate. So especially, of course, in manufacturing environments, that's something that we would like to further protect. And thinking about these things, we have seen over the last couple of years, and we are seeing still today, that supply chains are definitely much more being utilized as means to attack something than anything else. So I assume that some of you might have seen this screen or something of a kind. Your computer has been infected. Your computer have been, so they even know proper English apparently. But still, the message is clear. If you see this message and it's on your screen and you cannot move forward, then you have a problem. In any case, there's ways that you can prevent these things from happening. There's ways that you can sanitize, and we would like to convey that definitely also SBOMs are a good approach on getting there. So within IIoTSBOM, what do we try to do? We try to create awareness on SBOMs. We try to get companies which are developing software, which are developing appliances, devices, to understand what SBOMs are, to also recognize that they could be useful and helpful. And we then try to help them in building those SBOMs with different tools and components. And amongst others, by organizing events like this, organizing different webinars, we've done many over the last year, by participating into conferences, by showcasing use cases, by publishing all sorts of materials in making sure that that message is being conveyed. But we understand also that that's not enough. because we do see, and when we relate to companies, specifically also here in Belgium, they do see many other challenges happening up front. But that's okay, as long as over time you start to learn and to understand where SBOMs might be able to fit into your organization and how you can actually start using them. However, for some organizations, it is a necessity. And we've started to work with quite a number of manufacturing companies here in Flanders as well that have recognized that for them, it's an absolute necessity if they would like to sell or continue selling into the US, where there is a specific requirement. I'll get back to that in a second. But it means that, that you need to show what you're actually capable of when it comes to device security and how you manage it, and how you also transparently can give an insight in how you do that. And that's, again, also one of the main reasons why we try to do this. It's not only about, of course, abiding, let's say, the Biden administration regulation and requirements for all federal institutions in the US and related agencies. It's also because it helps you creating a shared responsibility. You can show basically to your customers that you are responsible for the products you're developing. Your integrator can start utilizing those SBOMs, and your customer can start to consume them and integrate them in their incident response team. So the whole chain is being populated this way. So it helps you also in being, let's say, a better supplier, at least that you're much more responsible. It also facilitates you both ways, both as a user as well as a producer, in the way that you can handle updates. So every device today that we know of has a little bit of software and intelligence in there that's much more, of course, than just the device in itself. It has some intelligence. That intelligence needs to be properly managed as well. So you need to provide updates. So the update mechanisms can be very well described into the SBOMs as well. And then there's, of course, compliance management, first from the vendor perspective. The SBOMs allow, and we'll showcase that during the day, the SBOMs allow also to show that for the devices that you're producing, you can provide this bill of materials, and therefore you can also indicate on which of the specific cybersecurity requirements from a device perspective you're trying to get compliant to. So there's many different pros. Why do we do this? We call ourselves Digital Security Catalyst. We are something in between, if you like, a research organization where we originate from. We're actually born and raised out of KU Leuven, and then specifically COSIC and Distinet, and then also the legal departments of KU Leuven. But we've grown after 20 years, of course. We have now about 850 something members, and we reach out to about 15,000 users and try to combine a bit of the needs and the new technologies being developed. So we help cybersecurity companies in the first place, but also manufacturing companies in this case to improve their cybersecurity, if you like. Good morning. Can you help the channel? Hi. Okay, please take a seat. Welcome. So since you're still awake, let's do the deal with legal first. And what about legal? Well, let's start with a number of different things. For those of you who are following this, CyberSecurity Act, is that familiar to you? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, just over half. So the CyberSecurity Act is basically something that went into force already in 2019. So it's at least good that some of you know about it. But those of you who know about this obviously also know that we're still really waiting for the first things to pop up out of it, namely certification of, for instance, devices. Things which are happening are, for instance, the certification of the models on 5G. So 5G cybersecurity certification has happened. There's now a cloud services scheme which is out there, and then of course also the common criteria. So those three things were already sort of there. In terms of devices, it's a slightly bit more complicated, and that takes much more time. But what we do see is a number of things happening which are going into the direction where probably Europe is taking a slightly different approach than the US in this. So the US with SBOMs are pretty directive on what they require. It's still relatively limited today. There's been some upgrades already coming. On European level, it's slightly more complicated, as this slide also shows. So there's different components in the cybersecurity certification framework, and the green just indicates you what the status is of the whole developments or discussions. And just for you to know, I mean, 2019, most of the discussions already started like in 2017 or even earlier. For instance, common criteria or cloud. So I won't dwell over this because it would take us far too far. But just for you to know that there's many different schemes which are being discussed, both in terms of governance and compliance and procedures and processes. And then there's the different technical elements, which I would suggest is the first thing that you and we would be looking at. So what are the technical requirements? So after you've read like 80, 90 pages, then the nitty-gritty details are usually in the appendix 1 to 5, whatever. And then you can see specifically what the ideas are on the technical components. So just as some ideas. Then there's also the thing about labeling, because certification is one thing, and the certification ideas, I'll talk about that in a second, are specifically going into the direction whereby there will be high utilization in terms of criticalities versus default, versus the very low ones. And the Commission has produced some more insight in what that really means in the Cyber Resilience Act. I'll talk about it in a second. So first about the labeling. Labeling is something, of course, somehow related to the certification, but not entirely. So here we see that there's developments happening in the idea that labels should be put forward. There's the idea from the Union, there's the ANISA, then there's different schemes happening on the member states. You can see some happening in Austria, in Germany, in France. So many different member states, many different labeling schemes, and of course, it wouldn't be Europe. There's slight differences between one versus the other. So you could be very well certified for France, which might not completely be the same for Austria, which is typically the case. But okay, things are happening in that space as well. The main reasoning for all of these things is to give you a bit of backgrounds why also SBOMs could be useful in these domains. The most recent one is the Cyber Resilience Act. Who knows about the Cyber Resilience Act? So about the same people. Okay, so you're following this. That's good. So cybersecurity rules on hardware and software products. But for those of us who are happy working with cybersecurity and with machines, both health or industrial equipment or other types of equipment, we've already seen a number of those things. Radio equipment, for instance. There are already other directives, radio equipment directives, there's the telecom ruling, there's the machine directive, there's the healthcare directives. All of them are somehow indicating something in the direction of there needs to be mandatory cybersecurity requirements for hardware and software products throughout the whole life cycle, and that is something new. So in short, what the main reasoning is to prevent fragmentation of the cybersecurity requirements for digital products, as we've seen just before, the labeling, different schemes, different ideas, different ways that member states are implementing this, is to introduce cybersecurity rules for manufacturers and vendors. So those of you here who are part of that group of life, it is specifically related to you, to us. There's a first official publication on the Cyber Resilience Act that happened, I think, just over a month ago, end of September. And now the Commission is asking for feedback, for comments, so we can use part of the discussion today to maybe provide some feedback back into the Commission. We've also been asked directly to give them some feedback, but I mean that's an open platform, of course. Main reason is the current legislation does not address non-embedded software products, okay, and does not prescribe cybersecurity requirements that cover the whole product lifecycle. I think that's also pretty clear. And so it wishes to, so the CyberSecurity Act, the one that we've seen before, creates a framework for EU certification schemes, only voluntary and not mandatory. I think that's a bit dubious because some of them are becoming much more mandatory, for instance, cloud or 5G. And it means that there is a gap in the legislation to be filled by this regulation, as in the Cyber Resilience Act. So it's meant to be a regulation as well. So it will provide some ideas on digital products and ancillary services. So it's not only about the products, it's also about, of course, the software and the software connected to it, for instance, cloud, of course. And then some specific obligations for manufacturers. It says basically that cybersecurity is to be taken into account for planning, design, development, production, delivery, and maintenance phase, and all cybersecurity risks have to be documented. Okay, so here we're getting very close to what we were looking for within the SBOMs as well. And manufacturers have to report actively exploited vulnerabilities and incidents. So that's not really directly part of the SBOMs, but there is something which is called an exchange system of the bill of materials, which allows also for incidents to be reported on this. And then, of course, there's the security updates and then the handling of the vulnerabilities. So the document, we can also hand it over to you, of course, as part of the slide decks that we'll provide you after the seminar today. And then the reasoning on the criticalities. So according to the Resilience Act, 90% of the products would fall on the default category, and only 10% of the products would fall under the class 1 or class 2 of criticalities. And the criticality is also what we try to aim for within IIoTSBOM. So it's more on critical software, industrial control systems, industrial systems that are being used for sensoring and related. And so, according to this framework, the baselines for the default categories might not be as heavy. But okay, then the question becomes, what if you would put into your manufacturing environment a default camera to do basically sensoring or following up on the activities happening into the plant? Would it be sufficient to put there a Nest Google or something of a kind, or do you really have to get into that level? So that's still a bit challenging in many different aspects. And then there's machine regulation, already told you about, so that's also under review. However, the machine regulation is also pretty clear for machines in the industrial space. They relate immediately towards the CyberSecurity Act. So in principle, if you manage safety under the machine regulation, then everything in relation to cybersecurity should be handled by the CyberSecurity Act, and likely also now the Cyber Resilience Act. So that about the legal environments that we are walking around and in, and where we also would like to see basically the sense of the use of SBOMs being understood in that space. And so I think when we are moving along towards the rest of the day, when you see much more happening in terms of what SBOMs are being used for from the different use cases from our partners that will be speaking today, that's definitely one of the things that you can take along. Yes, you can develop them. There's tools for this. There's good reasons for doing this. And definitely one of them is for compliance reasons. Because if you're not capable of basically building, selling your products or getting your products operational, then it doesn't make that much sense in any case. So there's good reasons for that. But let's go first back into pre-corona ages when the really origin of in this case the SBOMs from a legislative perspective is likely Solarwinds. Who's familiar with Solarwinds? It's always the same people. It's kind of interesting, but it's also quite normal because I do recognize you as the cybersecurity experts also in any case. So in short, so just under 2 years ago, Solarwinds as a company was providing systems to the US government in the first place, but also to others, where it was basically being used for system management, network management, operation management as a piece of technology. So it's basically a network management system environment that was being used. The product called Orion. And like there's many others. I mean, like there's multiple choices on this. Now, what happened is basically part of the Solarwinds application had some vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities, as simple as that, were exploited by a number of adversaries. In this case, you can call them criminals. And so they started to compromise a number of systems. They basically were able to use Orion to get insight in the most critical assets of an environment, which is quite obvious because it's a network management system. So it sees all of the different systems and assets. But more than that, beyond the monitoring, you were also capable of actually identifying what some of those systems were going to be used for when it came to accessing others. So if you were patient enough, then you could actually capture some of the credentials and then basically take over some of the machines within which were managed by Orion. So basically the real kingdom of any hacker that's looking for the crown jewels in this case. Everything was in there. So without going too much into detail, the case basically happened just prior to the corona outbreak, and as an effect, basically many of the systems of agencies in the US, both government agencies, but also government itself, had this issue of not being capable of getting control back again of their own networks and systems. And so this went quite fast up to the chain. And as a result, one of the first things the Biden administration did in their presence was to start building a case of something which was developing already for quite a number of years, namely the SBOMs, and putting that into law and directing from all companies, specifically focusing, of course, on SolarWinds and many of the others, Microsoft, requiring much more transparency into the software that they provided. Around the same time frame, there was another thing happening, Log4j, and which was causing also quite a lot of havoc, and as a result, of course, also therefore direct impact into many of the systems, and many of the systems, as we all remember, we didn't even know that had Log4j's in them, and how are you actually even capable of finding that out if you've never been involved into scrutinizing the softwares that you have in-house, or you don't even know from your suppliers, from the vendors that provide you the software, that this Log4j is actually part of the software being provided. So a number of these things happen. So background reasoning, why are we doing this? Because 95% of organizations are concerned about software security. So software security is indeed something to be worried about, because it's also in many cases, more and more, as we can see today, based upon open source components, as in the Log4j case. But there's other elements like continued supply chain attacks that we've seen. This is a case specifically reported by Microsoft last year, Nobelium. So we've seen that happening actually in 2022 again. So they're utilizing basically the systems of your supply chain, your suppliers, or basically you as a supplier to your customers. And that's what you would like to avoid. So therefore, supply chain cybersecurity is one of the biggest challenges from the last 2 years, I would even say. And then there's, of course, the reasoning about ransomwares. How do ransomwares happen? It's a piece of malware that's being used, which is basically putting itself somewhere into your systems, and how does it get there? That's usually the question. Well, there's many different ways that it enters in. In some cases, it's actually being part or becoming part of a piece of software that you've been trusting and relying already for many, many years, like in this case, SBOM.exe. And that component that has been basically being used to drop the malware in is then being utilized to start operating the malware, and in this case, ransomware. But again, many different ways. So if you're at least capable of identifying what some pieces of software need to do, then you should also be much more capable of identifying what they should not be able to do. And in this case, of course, operating malwares. So today, many of the cybersecurity systems are monitoring things like SBOM.exe. They're fixing, especially also in industrial environment, in terms of sort of white box. This is what it's supposed to be doing, and this is the only thing that's supposed to be doing. But of course, if that thing starts to operate beyond its normal boundaries, then you can either block it and therefore basically block everything that's happening into the factory, or you can say, okay, maybe we'll allow it under specific circumstances. So, but if you at least know what it's supposed to be doing, also from what the vendor is providing you, you're much easier. It will be much easier making that decision when an incident would happen like this. Okay, so there's many other different things that we can start debating about here, but I'm going to take a number of these things to a little bit of the discussion later, and switch over to the components of today, and basically why we are doing the things in relation to SBOM. So let me get this becoming so tiny. So in 2021, so basically, if you take it into consideration, about half a year after the Orion breach, so the Solarwinds breach.
Maybe you should share again the screen.
Okay, thank you. Right. So July 2021, an executive order was released that decided what the minimum elements for software bill of materials would have been. The executive order coming into place, that's basically requiring from government agencies and federal institutions in the US for all of the technologies that they would be buying, software and hardware, that they would be including a security bill of materials. Something that was already happening in two sectors for many years before, energy and healthcare. So they've had experiences with those SBOMs already before. But we've been working with the originators of the SBOMs for, I think, about a decade or so, which was what was called the anti-IA. The anti-IA is specifically focusing on improving the nation's cybersecurity. And since about just under a year now, everything in relation to SBOMs is now part of the Cybersecurity and Information Security Agency of the US. So it has basically moved up the chain and is now part of the direct activities of the US government when it comes to cybersecurity management. So what is an SBOM? I think that's something that we are going to debate about during the rest of the day. So I'm not going to dwell too deep on it. There's things that we can show, and you can take pictures, but in any case, you'll get the slides, no problem. the bill of materials in this case is what you would think of it to be. I mean, it's really a description, a list of components of basically a software environment. And it has to contain a number of very specific things which have been defined by the minimum requirements. And the minimum requirements as of this year have already started to improve. That means that there's new minimum elements being introduced. But the very basic things like data fields, very basic information, baseline information, automation support. What does that look like? What are the practices and processes of the system? What's the supplier name? What's the component name? Version of the component, and so forth. So very, very basic things. But the whole idea is, of course, to start with these and then to start slowly but surely integrating all the different components, which is what we can see happening already today. And so the whole idea for you today is to consider how, with the projects that you're developing or with the projects that you're installing and implementing and maintaining, would you be able to use an SBOM in the perspective of, I will be better able to manage my security, I will be better able to manage my software, as in also the licenses, how many licenses do we have? Are we having an interesting system to be able to monitor that? Can we provide also compliance on this? And as a producer, as a vendor, you're much more easy with all of these components to provide cybersecurity reasoning and also be compliant towards today's and future regulatory regimes when it comes to compliance management. So, yes,
question.
Of course.
What is the scope of the SBOM? Is it a product or a solution or an application or?
It's a very good question and it's not defined.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges, is that it's basically up to you to define what the scope is. But usually it's, in this case, when it comes to the software bill of materials, it's a piece of software. But if the piece of software is part of a piece of hardware, then, well, you will also start describing, of course, the relationship to the hardware. But if it's a piece of software related to hardware that's part of a larger system, then of course it makes sense to start also describing the larger system. So that's one of the challenges, that is, it's not defined. But in any case, it's already better defined, if you ask me, than what we're asking from the European Commission side, where, I mean, the specifications are very blurry. And here, at least you know that as a vendor, I need to provide a list of something, and you define what the list components in this case are, as long as they have the minimum elements here on the US side.
Okay.
Right? So, any other questions for the time being?
Does it relate to TwinTech as well?
I don't know. TwinTech, can you elaborate?
It's the digital print of
the digital twin. Okay. Okay.
It's a little bit similar, no?
Well,
This is going further, right? I mean,
Jan, please.
Probably would not necessarily say it's a digital twin.
No.
That probably would also describe the behavior and some methods and things. But the aim of the software bill of material is just to really make a catalog of known existing components that are inside the services. And we will elaborate on this a little bit further, also in other talks, but it's not really to describe the behavior and the status of the system, which you did in digital twin.
There's also sometimes a bit of confusion what a digital twin really is, because a digital twin can be basically a virtual representation, as in
metaverse, it's
yeah.
not that. I mean,
yeah,
it's really documenting where the product is coming from. For example, if it's a mattress, who sewed it, at what time, where, in which atelier or whatever. So this is really documenting you where it's coming from.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
And this is not necessarily have to be something that's software or hardware or computer or digital equipment.
Yeah,
it could be anything.
Well, it's likely useful then if you would, I mean, if you're developing these types of things, that it could be a basis to derive an SBOM from. And unlike what we'll see during the day as well, is that many companies out there today which allow to develop SBOMs are the ones which are coming from the software testing and software assessment capabilities environment, or even the software production companies. So companies which are basically producing systems that allow you to produce software. So to support CI/CD chains and so forth. So that's usually how it best relates. But we'll talk about that during the day.